First of all, I thank you very, very much indeed for your leadership, for holding this hearing. Secondly, before I go into my, by the way, I also submitted some.
Without objection, your full statement and any attachments for all of our witnesses will be made a part of the record. So proceed as you would like.
Let me also thank you very, very much indeed for your leadership in trying to save the VOA Kenya Rwanda Kirundi service. For God's sake, that is now the only remaining link to the outside world for Rwanda. After the closure of the BBC, there is nothing out there. Let me also take the opportunity to say that, in fact, the chairman of the Independent Media Commission just fled just a week ago. So the space is shrinking. So that VOA, Mr. Chairman, help us. Now, going back now to my presentation. As was mentioned, I worked for President Kagame twice, 2000 to 2002. It didn't work out. When I decided to leave, back to South Africa where I used to live, not in good terms. 2006, he invites me back. We sort ourselves out. He says, no, you can come back and lead the economic reforms, some of the things that we were hearing, which I did up to January 2010. I fled. And one of the issues was actually the same celebrations of the economic miracle. Statistics that are not really credible. I always stood my ground and said, Your Excellency, we are analysts, monitors, reviewers, so if we can't cook statistics. I'll throw some statistic here that people can come also go out there and look for themselves. If you see, for example, poverty reduction, Rwanda would say, well, 43% of the population are poor. You go to the World Bank, IMF, if you use 1.20 cents dollar as a definition, that's the globally accepted definition, 63% live under that. If we use another globally accepted definition, $2 a day, 83% of Rwandans are poor. So people are mistaking the clean streets of Kigali as measure of development. So anyway, that was my conflict. I said, no, we develop, but development is a lie. Is not a lie. It's not prestige. No, it's hard knocks of policy making. So I fled, and when I fled to South Africa, then that's really when my problems began. Chest. Then in 2013, 2014, after the death of my colleague Karegeya, same town, Johannesburg, I thought that was a good sign. I fled even from South Africa. So I went back to Canada. Canadian government itself monitors me and other colleagues because we're not safe. But at least I can sleep a little more peacefully than St. Johannesburg. Now, the human rights situation, I really don't have much to add beyond what the colleagues earlier on presented. But what I can add on though, is the angle that most reports fail to capture. They fail to capture 4 things. First of all, if we look at the human rights situation, the horrific situation in Rwanda, we have to look what we divide prior to 2012 as a phase, then after 2012. Then in those 2 periods, we look at the targets, who are the targeted types. We look at the official stance. We look at the global environment in Rwanda. And then we look at the impact on development. So let's look at the target between those two periods. Prior to 2012, the targets for harassment, imprisonment, or even killings, like political opponents or media. So individuals like Victoire Ingabire, Dio Mushahidi, these are the people who wanted to compete that are now in jail. We look, in terms of killings, we look at people like Seth Sendashonga. We look at the opposition leader basically beheaded in 2010. So the media types, editors. So really, that period, the targets are clear and predictable. It's either political or media types. But now, when we go now into post-2012, it's no longer just that. No. 3 months ago, President Kagame's personal doctor, Dr. Emmanuel Gasakure, shot in the police cell, killed. Gustave Mokononi, this is the coordinator for Transparency International, strangled. Kagame's personal driver, killed. So, whereas in the prior period, as I said, it's clear, the targets, but now it's almost random. Okay, now, number 2, the difference between the 2 periods. Prior to 2012, the official stance or the official attitude was deny, deny, deny. Post-2012, it's celebration. President Kagame himself, after Karegeya died, said, no, we did not kill him, but I wish we did. Moreover, people like him, it's only when and how. Of all places, that was stated in breakfast prayer in Kigali. Then, few months later, again, the President Kagame said, oh, those people who are making noise about the human rights. No. We are not only going to imprison people, we are shooting them, we're going to shoot them in the broad daylight. All this is in the public domain. So that's difference number 2. So the difference number 3 between the prior and post 2012. Prior to 2012, you see, the environment was basically, it's a kind of the usual, the environment was a kind of the usual dictatorial regime. The usual dictatorial regime is, well, you know, for ordinary folk, you just live on and there is no problem. The people who have problems are those high up in politics. But you see, this is no longer the situation. The situation now is that actually we are no longer talking about dictatorship. We're talking about now a totalitarian state seeking to control. So as we move and drive fear into the population, so as we move to 2017, with this business of constitution, the villages, the towns, they are being forced to sign up to say, hey, we want a constitutional amendment. So what you're going to see there in Rwanda is not people demonstrating against the third term, but rather people demanding that the man stays. It's orders. In Rwanda, the smallest administrative unit in the system is called Nyumba Kumi. That means 10 houses. Every 10 houses are watched by one individual. And as you move on, the whole state machinery driving fear is well established. Okay. The last difference between the two periods, the impact on development. Again, you hear how Rwanda is a great success story. Prior to 2012, you see, underground, the government was grabbing business. Not on surface. You wouldn't know it. Well, even American companies like Chevron, property grabbed. But those was kind of underground. But no, now in this current period, there is no apology for grabbing business. A $20 million mall, UTC, in the center of Kigali, is grabbed. And because the owner does not live there. It's as if it's like if you know, it's like saying, you know, so in the UK, if I say, well, since Bill Gates does not live in the UK, we are grabbing Microsoft. It's pure madness. So it's that environment then that really it's anti-developmental. So let me now conclude. We thank you again for holding this hearing. We thank you for fighting for the VOA. But also we encourage you that we take this, I saw those hard questions you were posing. So I think we need to keep on that, perhaps even think of a congressional resolution that can seriously have an impact on a policy change towards Rwanda. I thank you very much.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. I'd like to now, Mr. Higaro, if you would proceed.
Chairman Smith, ranking members of the subcommittee, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I think my name has been mentioned several times. I'm Robert Higiro. I was born in Uganda because my parents lived there after being forced out of Rwanda in 1959. So I share the same background with the president because he was also raised in Uganda as a refugee. I was part of the force that seized control of Kigali in 1994, which actually led to the falling of the former Hutu regime. and brought an end to the genocide in Rwanda. I did work for 2 decades with the Rwandan military and served in different capacities. I had 2 tours as a peacekeeper, one with the African Union, the initial launch of Darfur peacekeeping, and another one with the United Nations African Union Hybrid Mission, which is still ongoing. On returning home, that was 2010, I only found that I had been decommissioned and out of job. What that means in Rwanda is that no single investor or businessman is going to work with you, because it means you are disfavored from the system. So, as my colleague just mentioned, it's a controlled business environment. So I went to Uganda to pursue business opportunities. But not so long, I was summoned back to Rwanda. And I was questioned about my links with the former Army Chief of Staff, General Kayumba Nyamwasa, and former National Intelligence and Security Chief, Colonel Patrick Karegeya. These 2 officers had, of course, fallen out with President Kagame and had fled to South Africa. This happened to me, but even to other many officers. The most recent examples are Generals Tom Byabagamba, who actually spent the whole of his struggle since 90 to recently in 2010, I think 12, looking after Kagame, protecting him. He was a deputy sector commander in Southern Sudan as a peacekeeper. When he got home, he was taken straight to prison. Same happened to General Frank Rusagara, military attaché in the United Kingdom. After his services, straight to prison. David Kawiye served for a long time, straight to prison. And many, many, many others. The military we are talking about today is no longer there. He has young boys doing the peacekeeping, but all the top cadres that actually helped him get into power, they are either in cells, dead, running, all over the world. Others are idle in the country, which is a very dangerous aspect when it comes to national security. Well, after my interrogation, I was suspicious. I knew that something is wrong, and they want to use me for a dirty job, as usual. Having served 20 years, I knew exactly why they summoned me, and I was met by the military leadership. It was not long, my former trainees warned me that if I don't leave the country, I would be in danger. So I fled to Senegal, thinking if I go as far as possible, they will forget all about me. But a few months, 2 or 3, somebody is sent by the Director of Military Intelligence, Dan Munyuza, to tell me that they have a job for me. He calls me directly and tells me that they have sat down and decided to give me a job. And the job was to go to South Africa and eliminate former Chief of Staff, General Kayumba Nyamwasa, and former National Security and Intelligence Chief, Colonel Patrick Karegeya. And there's a question you asked, I should state that on record, that is Kagame involved? Up to where? When Munyuza, Director of Military Intelligence, is giving me a mission, he's only quoting the president. Now, I was desperate and I needed time to think about it, because I know that whether you do the job or not, you're going to die anyway. So I called Colonel Patrick, gave him the story, and we agreed that I go to South Africa and play by Dan's motions. I went to South Africa. We discussed between me and General Nyamwasa and Colonel Patrick how to go about it. So we agreed that I should gather as much evidence as possible by recording each and every conversation of instructions of this assassination plan, which could be used like we're using it today. So I recorded these conversations for over 7 months. And eventually, I told Munyuza, of course, that I could do the job. And he said he would offer up to $1 million USA for the job. We went on and on, modalities, the weapons to be used, what he wants me to do, how to do it, etc., etc. And then eventually he couldn't send in the money because we were waiting for the money to come in, which would add on this evidence. But they started, the boss was saying, he tells me, the boss is saying we should wait. Why can't you eliminate them first before you are paid? And I knew something is wrong. And then I had to flee South Africa. I went to Uganda, across to Nairobi, and eventually found myself in Belgium, where I live today as a dissident, like others. In Rwanda, like others, I'm a wanted man. Abroad, I'm on the hit list. Like him, like anybody else. Well, like he said, or the previous speakers, on the New Year's Eve of 2014, Kagame achieved his wish, and that's when Colonel Patrick Karegeya was found strangled in a Johannesburg hotel. I should add here that some of these individuals involved are known. We know them. South Africa is still conducting the investigations. We are waiting, but we know some of these individuals. General Kayumba Nyamwasa has survived, I think, 3 assassination attempts in South Africa. The first one, he was actually shot, but he didn't die. The others, they would find him in a different location, and it has been 3 or 4 times. He's still living. We don't know for how long. For me, when this happened, when Patrick died, I decided to find a reading newspaper, a Canadian newspaper, the Globe and Mail, and shared my story. I gave them access to the tapes. These tapes were independently verified or translated. This paper went as far as interviewing former military officers, and they confirmed indeed the voice belongs to Munyuza. And not only that, there is technology, as you are telling the members of Department of State. We can always verify this voice. If the government says, no, this is not Dan Munyuza, then they should give us the official voice of Munyuza, and we compare with the one I have. If it's not true, then, well, it's not. I cannot go again over the list of Rwandans who were assassinated abroad and in the country. You have talked about it. He has talked about it. We have submitted a copy of that. It's a long one, but the reality is tragic. I would like to end with a message to my fellow Rwandans. Hutus and Tutsis have much to attain for with regard to one another. Like me, many Tutsis support the establishment of truly independent courts that would, follow these crimes committed by President Paul Kagame and his allies. If you allow me, I'll read this quote from Mandela, which he gave out in 1994. I quote, "Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. The time for the healing of the wounds has come. The moment to bridge the chasms that divide us has come. the time to build is upon us. I sincerely thank the subcommittee for its time and interest and respectfully ask for help, and the help of the entire US Congress, to urge Rwandans to put aside their divisions, regional, political, and ethnic, and work peacefully together to end this repressive regime. Thank you.
Mr. Hagura, thank you very much for your testimony and for your courage, both you and Mr. Himbara, coming forward as you are, knowing that there are risks, and I thank you. Ms. Margon.
Thank you. I'll just give a bit of a shortened version. I did want to thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member, for holding this really important hearing. I know it's been a long time interest, and for inviting me to testify. I'm glad to be part of it, and also to even out the gender balance on the panel a little bit, so thank you. 21 years after the genocide, Rwanda has come a long way. By any measure, there have been real concrete improvement in terms of economic growth and access to public services. I won't go over the indicators that were mentioned on the last panel, but I do think it's worth noting the country is on track to meet the Millennium Development Goals, as you said, Ms. Bass, for 2015, and the parliament is majority female at nearly 65%. By the sounds of it, Rwanda is not a country in crisis. It's a country where things work. But in reality, it's only some things that work. The same government that has helped so many Rwandans out of poverty and propelled the country's economic growth has done so while severely restricting the fundamental civil and political freedoms of many. Indeed, gains are undermined by two persistent trends. One, systematic domestic repression that stifles, sometimes very violently, dissent, opposition, and independent thought. And two, repeated cross-border meddling and support for abusive armed rebel groups in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo or the DRC. International and regional attention on Rwanda has usually been when it's gone cross-border into the DRC, and this has happened at least 4 times since 1996. I today would like to talk much more about the domestic issues because I think actually it is within this environment that government accountability and transparency need to begin. Because in fact, if there had been a viable civil society and media, perhaps the authorities in Kigali might have stopped their meddling operations and other adventures abroad. Rwanda is a country of double realities. Visitors are impressed with the facade, the apparent security, but it's a smokescreen because many Rwandans live in fear, not just because of the legacy of genocide, but because the current government, the only one since the end of the genocide in 1994, runs the country with a tight grip on power. Indeed, the ruling party, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, dominates all aspects of political and public life. This is not new. It's been a constant feature since the end of 1994. Civil society is weak as a result of years of state intimidation, infiltration, and heavy, heavy administrative burdens. Activists have fled, and the one remaining domestic human rights organization was taken over by members sympathetic to the government in 2013. My organization, Human Rights Watch, is falsely accused of supporting the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or the FDLR, time and time again. Along similar lines, the Rwandan media remains heavily dominated by pro-government views, with most journalists unable or unwilling to investigate and report on sensitive issues. To be fair, the Rwandan government did introduce new media laws and reforms in 2013, which enshrine journalists' right to freedom of opinion and expression. But for the most part, these reforms haven't translated into any reality because of years of intimidation that have led to self-censorship and a decreased interest in investigating alleged abuse or even dissent. The Rwandan government invokes the need to prevent a resumption of ethnic violence as justification for restricting freedom of expression. The practice is disingenuous because it silences all forms of dissent and criticism, including many that have nothing to do with ethnic violence. And that's a tactic that could end up reversing Rwanda's apparent stability and even its economic successes. Despite abundant evidence of serious repression by the Rwandan government, there's been muted international criticism. Kigali enjoys strong support from donor countries like the US, international financial institutions such as the World Bank, and a range of other political actors and independent foundations. The absence of a comprehensive policy approach to address Rwanda's disregard for fundamental rights is stark. Rwanda is held up as the all-too-rare model of successful development in Africa, so the focus stays there. The repressive domestic environment is treated as an ancillary problem, or not treated at all, mostly because it seems it's just too difficult to reconcile this bad narrative with a more positive one. But there's good reason beyond moral considerations for donor governments and all others to consider all at the same time. In 2011, the World Bank's World Development Report argued that peace is most likely to endure if Rwanda's political space is gradually opened up, and it also argued that post-conflict stability premised on economic growth and strong leadership, but without political liberalization on the longer term, may have a finite duration and possibly a dramatic ending. His conclusion is an important warning for this Congress, particularly with the FY16 budget for foreign operations approaching. So what does this mean for U.S. policy? I'll make a couple of very quick recommendations. For starters, the administration and members of Congress should keep speaking out against abuses by the Rwandans. Recent statements have had a tremendous impact. Rwandan officials' insistent denials of repression in their country make it clear that the statements matter. International legitimacy is very important to the Rwandan government. It wants to be a regional player, and condemnation of poor domestic behavior doesn't fit that model. So please, keep up the pressure. Second, I won't go over the VOA again, but Human Rights Watch does support the full funding of VOA, and I was very pleased to hear the State Department say that as well. Thank you both for your leadership on that issue, as well as the chairman and ranking of the full committee. I'd also urge you and the administration to push the Rwandan government to permit the development of a truly independent civil society by allowing human rights groups to operate freely. This is not going to be easy. I note that while it was said on the earlier panel that there's $2 million for the FY15 budget, if you look at the FY13 budget, USAID spent $3.2 million on democracy and governance in Rwanda, but only 500,000 of this went to civil society, and none went to support the rule of law and Human Rights Watch. Sorry? I don't know. You can't find that information too publicly. I tried to look. But the absence of the funds doesn't mean there isn't engagement on the issue. What worries me is that because there is no funding specifically allocated for human rights and the rule of law and more money for civil society, there's no strategic approach being invoked to address these issues in a difficult environment. So I would encourage Congress and the subcommittee in particular to engage very robustly on this issue. Finally, I'll just say that the United States should use its prominent role at the World Bank and with other financial institutions to urge broader guiding principles that are not only rooted in the freedom from want, but also the freedom from fear. I'll close by saying that I'm aware of concerns expressed by some in the administration and also here in Congress that a more public stance on Rwanda's domestic environment would undermine the bilateral relationship between Rwanda and the United States. But the U.S. often underestimates its own leverage and becomes overly cautious. The U.S. may need Rwanda for peacekeeping and other issues, but Rwanda needs the U.S. too. So the U.S. should continue refining its policy on Rwanda and send a strong signal of support to the many citizens who crave the freedom of expression and greater political space, but haven't had access to it. Thank you.
Appreciate it very, very much. Mr. Shalita.
Members of the panel, it's an honor to be invited to speak before you at this hearing. Thank you very much. The diversity of viewpoints included here demonstrates your commitment to a strong partnership between the United States and Rwanda. No topic is closer to my heart, Mr. Chairman. My name is Willis Shalita, and I'm a proud American, but also a very proud Rwandan. But at one time, Mr. Chairman, I had no country. In the early 60s, hundreds of my fellow Rwandans were expelled from our homeland. I lived in exile in Uganda up until Idi Amin's reign of terror made me a refugee for the second time. Mr. Chairman, I've lived under a dictatorship. I know how it feels. I know what to look for. I'm here to tell you today, Rwanda is not a dictatorship. 42 years ago, America welcomed me into this country. I found a home, and also my vocation as a special investigator for the State Bar of California. My job was to separate fact from fiction, build a strong case, and testify under oath about my findings. I did so hundreds of times, Mr. Chairman, over my 28-year career as an officer of the court. Today, I work primarily as a writer with a focus on Rwanda. After the genocide, 1 million Rwandans lay dead. No one had any real idea how to render justice to survivors and perpetrators, much less how to live together again. 21 years later, Mr. Chairman, the country stands out. Rwanda leads the world in women's representation in parliament. Mr. Chairman, things don't happen where there are no conducive conditions. Rwanda ranks #1 among low-income countries in the World Bank's annual Doing Business Index. Professor Paul Farmer of Harvard Medical School found that the Rwandan health system, and I quote, achieved some of the steepest declines in premature mortality ever documented anywhere, end of quote. Funding from the United States played an important role. As has been said, Rwanda is the 5th largest troop contributor to UN peacekeeping missions. Religious freedom is protected in Rwanda. An attempt to criminalize homosexuality was defeated in Rwanda. Rwanda is socially conservative, but gays and lesbians need not worry about government interference in private matters. Now, Mr. Chairman, at this point you may be thinking, yes, but why does there have to be a but? The facts are real. The data comes from trusted independent sources. Is Rwanda perfect? Not even close. But the best way to uncover its flaws is go to Rwanda, where the most scandalous data about the country is made public by its own institutions. Go attend a citizen outreach meeting and tell me if you think Rwandans are too intimidated to tell truth to power. I say not. So why do we often find ourselves adrift in this strange Bermuda Triangle of confusion when it comes to Rwanda? To prepare for this hearing, Mr. Chairman, I put my investigator hat back on. How is it that individuals who once proudly contributed to Rwanda's success now calmly assert that the country is some kind of tropical North Korea? Mr. Chairman, the answer is simple. In fact, simpler than I thought. Money and politics. The House lobbying database records that my fellow witness, Dr. Himbara, hired a top-tier firm in 2014, paying them $190,000. If he can afford that sum on his own, then I want whatever consulting gigs he has. And Mr. Chairman, if the money isn't his, then this committee deserves to know the source of this money. Democracy in Rwanda, now, DIRN, registered its domain. This is his outfit. They registered their domain a week ago, around the same time this hearing was announced. Was something wrong with whatever affiliations were being used before? This committee needs to know. I note that Mr. Higiro here is a senior cadre of the Rwanda National Congress, a foreign political party whose leaders seek the violent overthrow of the Rwanda government. And they even collaborate with the FDLR, a genocidal terrorist organization. Mr. Chairman, people have a right to seek influence, provided they follow the rules. But until we know who foots the bill and why, there is no way to assess the credibility of claims made by this shadowy network. Maybe I'm naive, Mr. Chairman, but my experience is that truth is more or less free for the picking. But if you want people to believe lies, well, that's going to cost you. References have been made about trials or fake trials and imprisonments of Rwandans. Mr. Chairman, I'm here to tell you that trials in Rwanda are open. There has been confidence expressed in the Rwandan judicial system by countries like the US, Canada, Norway, Denmark, who have extradited people who had bloody hands during the genocide against Tutsi. Mr. Chairman, this malicious campaign damages the strong bilateral relationship between Rwanda and America. But we must not let cynicism prevail over common sense and core human value that my beloved two countries share in equal strength and measure. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll submit a longer presentation for the record. Thank you, sir.
Shalita. Let me just ask you, Mr. Shalita, the Globe and Mail, in an article by Jeffrey York and Judy Rever, which is a very extensive piece that they did, an investigative piece. They point out, and I quote them in pertinent part, that the investigation by the Globe and Mail found a common thread in interviews about plots to murder exiles. Rwandan agents search for vulnerable people within the social circles of their targets, then put pressure on them or offer them money in exchange for their cooperation. In some cases, the agents go back repeatedly to do the same potential assassins, even if they fail to do the job, urging them to do what they were paid to do. You've heard today witnesses, two, who have personal knowledge, one with recordings that I have asked, and I will continually ask the State Department to review. I find it appalling that they have not done so yet, and maybe they have, and somebody will emerge and say, oh, I've done that. But it certainly has not percolated to the point where the policymakers, the Assistant Secretary acting, and of course, Mr. Feldstein, have any knowledge of. They have to get back to us on that. And then, of course, Mr. Himbara, who was literally there with him and was part of a team on the economic side. Are you saying this isn't true?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to respond to that. Having been an investigator for 28 years, let me say this. Allegations are simply that. I welcome your request that these allegations, these accusations, be verified by independent parties. Let me say this, Mr. Chairman. The South African government, looking into General Nyamasa's attempted assassination, has not finished its investigation. So how do we rush to conclusion that the Rwanda government was involved?
Well, before I go into our other witnesses, just let me say, and even acting Assistant Secretary Jackson pointed out that they expressed concern in January 14 about the succession of what appeared to be politically motivated killings of government critics in exile. And then he went through a long list of, he did not elaborate when asked, and I'm sure he'll get back. But, I think there are people very concerned within our U.S. Department of State. I think Ms. Morgan is probably very concerned about these people who are turning up dead. And when South Africa and other nations do take actions to investigate, and it's very hard, to cross border especially, to really get to the truth of what's happening and when and where. But when you see a pattern, reasonable men and women say, there's a real problem here. And as Mr. Higaro said, and I thought that was very telling, that when statements are made by the Director of Intelligence about killing, he's only quoting the president. That's pretty strong allegation.
Yes, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, if you could yield. Didn't you said that the South Africans were still investigating, and I thought the South Africans expelled the Rwandan representatives, no?
Thank you, Ranking Member. No, if I can correct you, the South African government has come to the conclusions that the alleged assassins were from Rwanda. The conclusion, Madam Member, has not been made that the Rwanda government was involved. We live in America where you are assumed innocent until proven otherwise. There
Right.
is no conclusive evidence.
No, but I thought they expelled the Rwandan diplomats. So it wasn't just that it was a Rwandan that they said committed the crime, but I thought that they kicked out the diplomats. They did not kick out the Rwandan ambassador from South Africa?
Thanks again. During the exchange of words, as happens always, the Rwandan ambassador was asked to leave. But soon thereafter, Rwanda sent back another ambassador, and we have, Rwanda has an ambassador in Johannesburg.
Let me just ask you further on this. If Paul Kagame is not in any way complicit in any of this, nor his director of national intelligence, would you then support, and would the Rwandan government support, an international team of investigators who would have unfettered access to information, to people, so that they can investigate this and go to source material, look at logs, look at wherever the investigation takes them? Because otherwise, I would be concerned about a whitewash. Again, more people dying. I'm very worried that this is in escalation, not in decline. Especially as Mr. Himbar mentioned earlier, the two phases. It's political opponents, but now it's morphed into his driver and other people who are selected for killings, and it just raised serious questions about how wide and how deep this will go in terms of the killings. So would you support, do you believe the administration would support, I'm talking about the Kagame administration, unfettered access and an investigation by an international team of maybe under UN auspices or AU auspices who would get to the bottom of this?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. As I stated before, I don't speak for the Rwanda government. I'm here on my own as an American Rwandan who is interested in what goes on in my country. Mr. Chairman, your question is above my pay grade, but I would join with you having an independent body investigating these allegations. Again, Mr. Chairman, these are nothing but allegations.
But again, we did invite you to join us. The embassy of Rwanda requested that, and I want all sides at all times, on something so important as this, to be present at the table. So I would hope you would take that back.
Mr. Chairman.
Join us in asking that Kagame allow that kind and even embrace it. If he's innocent, if I were innocent, and I were in his shoes, I would demand that there be an international investigation to clear my name. There's nothing, as Proverbs says, more important than one's name. The book of Proverbs, if your name is tarnished, you invite people who have no political agenda whatsoever to go in and uncover the truth.
Mr. Chairman, again, I was asked by the Rwanda embassy to come and testify because they know of my passion about what goes on in Rwanda. I have no affiliation. I have no place in making decisions like you are asking for. However, let me say this, Mr. Chairman. I would support you fully, 100%, to send an independent organization to look into allegations. Again, Mr. Chairman, these are nothing but allegations. And making allegations doesn't make a witness believable or not believable. It should be put to test, and all evidence should be brought in and verified.
Did you understand?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the ranking member, Karen, she got it right. The court case on attempted assassination of Nyamwasa, the original one, was settled in court. And the result of that case was that, no, it's not actually the ambassador that was kicked out. No, the ambassador of Rwanda is the only person that was left. All the other Rwandan diplomats were expelled. And it's important to hear what the judge said. The South African judge said, well, we are sending these 4 people to jail for this attempted assassination, but actually the people who should be in this court are authorities in Rwanda. That is clear. Then further north, in Sweden, expelled a Rwandan diplomat for harassing Rwandan diaspora. Down south in UK, the Metropolitan Police, aka the Scotland Yard, had to send warnings to British Rwandans to watch out because they were targets. But for the South African case, done. It's a done deal. Absolutely. You are right. Yes.
I just want to ask a couple of questions, and we'll get back. Let me ask, Mr. Higaro, in your opinion, is the U.S. Department of State pressing an investigation into the killings and the alleged conspiracy to assassinate well enough, aggressive enough? Have you been interviewed by anyone? Have your tapes been analyzed from CIA to U.S. Department of State, as far as you know? And where is Colonel Dan Muyuza, the Director of Military Intelligence? Is he still in that position in Rwanda, or has he been dismissed? Where is he?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan Muyuza actually was moving with me. I was employing him indirectly. So he started this when he was the Director of Military Intelligence. But you know, we have the Chief of External Intelligence, who is supposed to be dealing with people like us who are supposed to kill people outside the country. So because of the way they thought I'm going to do something great and become a hero, as they told me, he was moved from the Directorate of Military Intelligence to the Director of External Intelligence. So I continued with him. When the mission aborted, he was taken to prison slightly. And then he was brought back as he's now the Deputy Police Commander. You know, but he's still in Rwanda. Let me make something clear. It doesn't really matter where Dan Muyuza or Jack Nziza, it doesn't matter what post they hold in the government or in the military or in the police. It's just a shadow for them to do what they're supposed to do. These are 2 gentlemen who get direct orders from the president. They are the ones who have killed almost everybody that has died. The set Senda Shongas they are talking about, they were killed by Jack Nziza in Nairobi when he was a diplomat there. It doesn't matter where they are. But I'm going to defend my colleague, Mr. Sharita. I feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for Rwandans who are here. I feel sorry for the diplomats in these embassies of Rwanda. They are told what to say. There are lines they can't cross, and you can't see him. He doesn't really have even that information. They don't even feed him information to support them. You know, he doesn't know anything about these cases. He's an American. He has been in America, has never lived in Rwanda. He doesn't understand what's going on. You know, but the passion he talked about, he thinks the country is moving in a direct direction. And I'm sure he's going to find out more after this hearing, and probably we're going to talk about it. So that's the truth. And to the other question of the State Department, they have not done that so far. They have never reached me. They have never reached me, but I've shared this with the Belgian government. And I think they know because, of course, when we're asking for asylum, we need to give such evidences to support our criteria to be recognized. And still on that point, I would request to clarify that even where we are not safe. And the governments, like you asked the department responsible, they think it's a game or a joke or it's not really serious, but it is very serious. The widow and children to the late Colonel Patrick Karegeya was strangled in South Africa are here in US. But they have been denied asylum up to now because of this conspiracy. I'm not accusing anybody, but there is a problem. They are like prisoners. They don't move out of US. It's a current situation. You can take it from there and find out what is the problem. What kind of criteria does this family, that their own father and husband was strangled in South Africa, does not fulfill for them to get asylum in this democratic country? You know, it's a big issue. The conventions, the Geneva Conventions are clear, but something is wrong somewhere. Even us in Belgium, in Europe, in Africa, the refugees from Rwanda. Let's talk about the kidnapping of Lieutenant Mutabazi to Rwanda. It was against the law. But the Ugandan government has never said anything about that. The UNHCR has never said anything about that. But it was wrong. The wife and the children to this lieutenant are somewhere in a camp in Uganda. The children are not going to school. She was supposed to be taken somewhere. She's still there. So are we doing enough? Is these strong countries doing enough on what we are talking about? Absolutely not. We are here. I put my life on the line to come here and say, look here, the problem is this. And I do this in many different capacities, and I talk to different Rwandans, Hutus, Tutsis. I educate every day, every day, every day. I talk to whoever I meet. I've talked to different diplomats, but nothing is being done. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to ask the two of you, and feel free to chime in, Ms. Margolin. What's Kagame's motivation? I mean, I'm assuming that you are saying he's going to run again for a third term. What's his motivation? If he's so strong, why does he need to do this?
Thank you. The third term thing is complicated now. I think Himbara talked about it. What even Mr. Shalita believes is that the Rwandans love Kagame. Kagame is going to have a youth gathering in Texas, Dallas, on Saturday. Do you know the number? 700 young boys and girls. Do you know where they're coming from? Rwanda, the diaspora here, Canada, Europe. Do you know who funds them to go there? The government. The money you give him.
The money we give him.
Yeah.
You're saying he's flying Rwandans in from all of those countries?
Yes.
They don't live in Texas?
Not everybody's in Texas. And they have to feed, they have to sleep. I mean, it's not my...
Well, he's having a rally of
Yes.
Rwandans
Yes.
in Texas, and he's
it's not my
flying them from
saying.
all over the world to be there?
Yes.
So what you're saying is that he does not have the support at home?
I don't know.
I mean, why does he need to assassinate people all over the world?
What should I say? I mean, we fought a very complicated war from 90 to 94.
Mm-hmm.
The Rwandans have experienced, mention any single crime which can help us that has not been committed in Rwanda. What does the president want that I don't want for Rwandans?
You want to respond to that?
Yes.
Why does he need to do that?
There are several reasons why the situation has become what it is. First, remember that already the U.S. had to apply for immunity for President Kagame. He made history here from a lawsuit. That's one. That is from the widows of the presidents that were shot down. This government applied for immunity for him. Uh-huh. The Congo mapping report, the UN mapping report concluded that there is enough material there to indict Kagame for genocide.
So he's doing this so that he doesn't have witnesses around what he did?
So
he's,
the moment he leaves power, the immunity is gone. That's one reason.
okay.
It's immunity that there's so many people that he has offended, including, you know, okay, so that's one. Number two, this development, the so-called development people are talking about, do you know the biggest, the biggest companies that actually control the Rwandan economy? It's the Rwandan Patriotic Front companies. The holding company is called Crystal Ventures Limited. It controls just about everything. So President Kagame, he wears two hats. He's the president of, no, he wears three hats. President of Rwanda, chairman of the party, but also the leading businessman. So the Rwandan version of capitalism actually is crony capitalism. He loses that office. Who knows what that business empire will be?
Okay, so Mr. Shalita,
Yes.
everything that you've said is that, I guess, is that there's no proof of anything. Everything's just allegations?
What we've had here today, and you know, having been an investigator for 28 years, investigating the best lawyers in this country, I hear nothing but allegations. If there are facts, why not share them with you?
Well, I think that Mr.
I resent the fact that my fellow witnesses here, they think they're entitled, well, they're entitled to their opinion, but they are not entitled to their own facts. Let me say something, Mr. Chairman.
Again, we
The
have
allegation,
a man who has recorded the request that he assassinate two individuals that the Toronto newspaper and the BBC found credible. To my chagrin, and I'm sure the ranking member, our own State Department has not even listened to those tapes. I mean, that is evidence. That's evidence. Of course, there's a due process stream that needs to be followed, but when you get multiple allegations with streams of evidence, begs the question, why are we looking the other way and acting as if none of it's credible?
with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, what the newspaper in Canada says is not evidence.
Well, no, let me just ask you this, and
legal
I'll get to you.
institution.
Let me just ask you this, as an investigator. If there are tapes, would you then want to have a tape of the voice of the person who the allegation is made about? Because there's enough science to prove whether or not it's the same person.
Sure.
It doesn't seem to be
I have not
that
listened.
deep.